And this is Alpha Talks Norwegian Fashion, and this is the fourth installment of a series of conversations that are taking place across the Nordic countries, so in Oslo, in Stockholm, in Copenhagen, in Helsinki, and in Reykjavik. The Nordic fashion region has experienced a fashion boom, in my opinion, and our fashion cultures have become more nuanced, and the offerings have become more complex, both internationally, how we communicate it and how it's seen in the outside of the region, but also internally. And the aim of these talks is to uncover the fashion cultures in the specific countries that we are visiting, to understand links between the past and the present. Now, today we are zooming on Norwegian fashion, and I'm no expert, but these lovely ladies are, so we will get that sorted. But I like to begin our talk by quoting the Norwegian philosopher Lars Svensson, who has said, "Norway can hardly be called a spearhead in the context of fashion." Now, this was written in 2004, and while Norway is not a nation with long traditions for fashion, I wonder if this viewpoint still holds true 21 years later. While Norway may not have an unyielding roster of internationally successful fashion designers, and it may in some aspects be eclipsed by its Nordic neighbors when it comes to a clear and proactive local fashion scene, there are many new initiatives across Norwegian institutions that have been established with the aim of understanding fashion in Norway, its past, present, and future. Some of these are, of course, where we've been sat a minute, the International Library of Fashion Research, Christiania University, the National Museum, even the KIO, the National Academy of the Arts. Across these institutions, we see fashion or research on Norwegian and even Sami fashion is burgeoning. We could call this a recent critical turn. In a country known for knitwear, folk costumes, and rich craft traditions, how has Norwegian fashion developed in recent years? What characterizes the current fashion scene? And what industry is Norwegian fashion graduates trained for? What are the qualities and promises of future Norwegian fashion are some of the questions I'm hoping we can uncover tonight. Now, Norwegian fashion obviously exists in a multitude of expressions as both visual and material culture. And I use the term Norwegian fashion quite freely to refer to both visual and material cultures created in Norway or by Norwegians living abroad. And to help me cast light on this very exciting and complex topic, I have a panel of wise women with me tonight. Margaret Abeshu is an Oslo-based designer and artist originally from Ethiopia. She holds an MA in clothing and costume design from the Oslo National Academy of the Arts, and her work has been exhibited at various art institutions in Norway. Her practice explores the relationship between the body, memory, and material objects, focusing on critical theory and Afro-diasporic experiences. Synne Skjulstad is professor in communication and design at Christiania University here in Oslo. Her current research focuses on the intersections of media, design, and fashion, as well as more artistic research projects. And she has published widely, both internationally and nationally. And she has led a research project on the mediations of Norwegian fashion. Currently, Synne works on a research project on the histories of Norwegian fashion in collaboration between Christiania University and the National Museum and their curator of fashion, Ane Lynge-Jorlén. Last but definitely not least, Astrid Skjerven is Professor Emerita of Design Theory at Oslo Metropolitan University. Her field of interest are everyday aesthetics and the relation between culture and sustainability, and Nordic design in a global perspective. Astrid has edited, authored, and published several books on sustainable fashion and Nordic design internationally, and she's currently working on a paper on the jewelry designer Tone Vigeland's artwear. Right. I always kick off these conversations by asking the same question, obviously framed by the local context. So I would like to start by asking you the same question to all of you. What 3 words do you associate with Norwegian fashion? Who wants to go first?
I can go first.
Yeah.
Okay. Shortly, it's not negative or positive. Let's just see, the challenges and the opportunities. I would say niche, visionless, and slow. Yeah, that's the 3 words.
All righty. Synne?
I would say undiscovered.
Yeah, it's a good one.
And alternative.
Yeah.
And boring.
Okay.
So, but in the alternative lies the alternative is a positive.
There lies a promise.
There lies a promise and sort of a positive. It's a positively laden alternative, and the boring is not.
Okay. Yeah. Astrid, what 3 words do you associate with Norwegian fashion?
Well, I don't have 3 words, but I have 3 statements.
Okay.
Lots of great talented designers. Interesting rural traditions.
Yeah.
And lack of infrastructure.
Yeah. I'm just making sure to get all the, good things that you said. So interesting rule of
Rural.
oh,
Traditions.
yeah, yeah.
Sorry, I speak up. Rural traditions.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so bearing that in mind, I would like to try to understand how contemporary fashion is sort of connected to its past. So that will be the first step of the conversation tonight. So there is obviously rich textile traditions in Norway, including weaving and knitting. And Astrid, being a specialist of Nordic design in a more sort of helicopter view, but also having a keen interest in Norwegian design and Norwegian bodies placed in the design field. Do you see any connections between contemporary Norwegian fashion and its rich craft past?
Yes, I do. I do historically along a line, and I do now because it's very often related to crafts, for instance. We have very little industry as regard garments. So actually people have to turn to crafts or they have to turn to art.
So
as the fibers, the materials are based on the natural materials and the knowledge of it, the competence.
So you see that happening in contemporary fashion, that people rely on those good, tradition, that the basement, the foundation of that craft.
Yes, combined with others.
Yeah. Okay. If we look at the internationalization of Norwegian fashion, there are a couple of names that obviously emerge. And to my knowledge, being a Dane, the greatest and the most successful one is Per Spock. I don't know if I'm pronouncing the surname right. Yeah. And after having studied and worked at Dior and Ferrou in Paris, Spock ran his own label in Paris in the 1970s and up to the 90s. In a present-day context, one of the Norwegian names that pop up on the more glamorous scene is Petter Dondas, of course, who has worked for Ungaro and Pucci and Cavalli, and now he runs his own label. At the more niche end of the field, we have someone like Bror August Vestby, who, together with his partner Benjamin Baron, is running All In, and they are working out of Paris. I wonder, Astrid, is Per Spock a one-off example of success? Or can we deduct something wider from his example to understand Norwegian fashion and its qualities?
Well, he's almost one-off. The first famous one. And I believe it's because he went abroad. He took his And she took a fashion education, a haute couture education in Paris. Went to Paris, got his education, and then was an apprentice at several places. And then he got connections. I was able to start his own firm. And then he could bring in his own label, he could bring in Norwegian traditions and make a career based actually on folklore clothing in Norway. But that's a long journey.
So I'm hearing you say going abroad is wise.
Yes.
Okay.
You have to kind of find a basis abroad, and then you can build up yourself.
I think we'll return to that later. What other key designers spring to mind that have left a mark on the more recent Norwegian fashion history, if you are to name any?
I like to mention 3. There could be many, but I like to mention 2 because I got different. And I do it chronologically. So I'll start with I got for Kirsty. Oh my god. That's so little life.
Or perhaps you just skip the chronology and just... Or being a design historian.
His dish inside. I'm so sorry.
Don't worry.
In the 60s, she almost made a career. And she was a weaver, made wonderful fabrics out of an old kind of sheep in Norway. And then she turned to fashion and made kind of very court-like collections. Some collections there for a few years, based on these wool textiles in kind of op-art patterns and colors, very vivid, and these very quant-like shapes. And they were very special, very original, wonderfully made. And she got a grant to go to Paris, the Skjerven in Paris, for the haute couture firms. And they were interested, absolutely. But then she didn't get any more grants, and there weren't any connections between the Norwegian design milieu and the French haute couture milieu. None. So it just all fell apart. She wasn't able to continue, although the interest was there. So she turned into her business into what's called Skjerven today, and folkloristic knitting. And that was it. And that's a disaster, I think. And, that's in the 60s. And then there's one who's running now, Ane Lynge-Jorlén. She's doing slow fashion by small knitted underwear, very exclusive. And she has managed this because she has got grants from distriktsutviklingsmidler. There are grants for building up local small industries in Norway. Has a tradition for that. Innovation Norway has that. So she applied there and was able to stand it herself and got some more grants. And now she's kind of surviving on this thing. But she's not able to produce her goods in Norway. The luxury production units. It's produced in Melon, Italy, by a small firm there, and then imported to Norway and sold in Norway and to tourists. So that's a kind of making a way to get local grants, not local small business. And then third one, very special, as Eva Schönberg. She took her education as fashion designer at the National Academy of the Arts in 1986. And she was interested in national traditions in Norway, Norwegian traditions, and also in Japanese traditions. And made some wonderful origami-like works that are kind of sculptural clothing, handmade. And she had her first collection in 1987. nobody understood, or very few understood what it was all about. And so it was quite difficult. And then she had one engagement as a costume designer for the film The Pathfinder. It was Oscar nominated, and her costumes was based on both, as I interpreted, a kind of mix between Sami clothing tradition and just the spot of Akira Kurosawa's gown. So that was it. And then she was in a kind of limbo, or maybe she also wanted to explore more, and she was very interested in this kind of not only tradition but the relation between space and fabric and body and time. And then she turned to Japan, because they have quite other traditions as well, relations between these things. And she stayed there for about 10 years. And it came back quite refined, and she has turned to doing installations in various materials, in fibers, wooden materials, paper, whatever. And she actually was a representative for Norway in the Biennale of Architecture in Davis a couple of 40 years ago. I think she finds herself quite well with that situation, but it's still a little bit bitter to see her talent get lost, to move into something else, because she was forced to it. Maybe it was good, but still there wasn't any kind of foundation for her kind of work in Norway.
I think that's quite telling of the themes that we've also touched on in this conversation today about support structures and financial struggle. Thank you. So, Synne, moving on to perhaps a more sort of setting up a more contemporary scene. You've edited a book on contemporary Norwegian fashion designers with the aim of positioning their work within the wider debates on how we can rethink fashion today. And these included our younger generation, including Skjulstad, Bro August that we spoke about earlier, Ramona Salo, and Tonje Pleur, and more. All of these are small independent designers with a small production. And in your work, you mentioned that these designers do not fully work within the fashion industry, as their work is driven by artistic exploration and alternative forms of critical expression. And in my experience working with independent emerging designer, that equals small means and financial struggle. What does and I know this is a big question, but just in a few words, if you can what does your findings tell us about the current Norwegian fashion scene?
I think, one of the things I think emerged through this work was that I sort of lacked, as an author and as a researcher, I sort of found myself lacking a properly working vocabulary to actually describe these fashion practices in ways that sort of fitted into sort of the understandings that were in the broader culture. So using the word fashion, for instance, I always had to sort of explain it's fashion, but it's not only fashion, and it's also a craft practice, and it may be a sculptural practice as well, and it's a critical practice, but maybe there are some products as well. And so you got all these sort of combined, like what do you call it, hyphen, when you sort of bind words together, and you get this long sort of train of words to sort of describe the kind of practices that these practitioners just exemplify.
Yep.
So I think sort of one of the main findings is that one, the current vocabulary doesn't necessarily sort of function so well. Second, that passion. Everybody here is probably used to talk about music. Just to make an sort of analogy, that if we talk about music, it's everybody knows that there are different kinds of music. So when you talk about music, you don't need to sort of put all kinds of music into sort of the one category in one box. Yeah, so we have like the hit list on the one hand, and you have like contemporary music, really experimental contemporary music, and you don't in our culture you don't sort of evaluate these expressions in the same way, and everybody sort of agree that that's okay. So, if you put a really experimental music and sort of evaluate it with the criteria taken from the hit list, of course it doesn't work. But sort of that conversation, I think, needs to sort of happen when it comes to fashion. That it's possible to talk about different kinds of fashion and different ways of sort of practicing fashion within different kinds of systems. So there's one industrial system, maybe there's a cultural system, and that they might intersect or they might be separate, but it's not necessarily sort of the same on every sort of aspect. And when you talk about success, okay, success, what kinds of success? Is it financial success? Is it artistic success? Is it success in terms of being able to explore some specific aspects of some questions that you actually need to sort of work through design and through making things? So there's sort of a whole lot of different ways of practicing fashion, but we don't necessarily sort of have that sort of very differentiated dialogue sort of in sort of the public sphere in Norway, and these discussions tend to take place maybe at venues, maybe such as this one, which is why I like really welcome this discussion. So, not a short answer, but
No, but a very, very good answer, because I think what you're basically saying, that there are different sets of values within different genres, and there needs to be room to discover and grow, can I say, more mature in terms and confident to shift between different vocabularies, different sets of values. That's what I'm hearing you saying.
yeah, and also sort of looking back sort of at sort of the Norwegian sort of fashion histories.
Yeah.
There are a lot of sort of ways of practicing fashion that does not sort of that has not happened within the sort of industrial system, especially the industrial system of fast fashion, that we sort of tend to look at as sort of the, I don't know, normal situation, and it isn't, because it hasn't been that way forever. But we tend to sort of see that kind of system as I don't know, sort of as a natural state of mind, but it's kind of a recent phenomenon. So we need to also have these sort of different kinds of systems present in the ways we sort of conceive different kinds of fashion practices, both now, but also in our past. Yeah.
When I look at fashion, Norwegian fashion landscape taken as a whole, or perhaps not really as, well, perhaps I should say, when I look at Norwegian fashion designers, I tend to see that there is this traffic of designers moving into the field of artistic exploration and of artistic practice. We have Anne Torbjørnsen, we have lovely Margaret Abeshu, who's with us tonight, Admir Batlak, just to name a couple of these designers of recent trajectories. And there seems to be, and I don't know if this is the right word, but some polarization between fashion as commercial, industry-based enterprise and artistic practice. And how does this polarization impact not just the field of emerging fashion designers who are struggling, as you know, a lot as it is, but also the overall Norwegian fashion scene, this gap between industry and artistic exploration?
I think it is sort of interesting, and it's interesting as a sort of a researcher to see this sort of unfold. But I think like one of the reasons this is happening is, of course, because of the access to funding. So that's one thing, and I mean, and again, it depends for emerging designers now. What is your motivation to go into the field? Because if it is to run a sort of profitable business that is sort of product based and only, then there isn't room necessarily, I think, to sort of also pursue artistic exploration fully. So then you sort of get this polarized position, and I mean you gain something and you lose something. So it's not sort of, and it's and I think also it is sort of the perception um of fashion. I mean, just for like think 10 years ago, then you didn't necessarily sort of question the whole industrial fashion system as much as we do today, because the sort of awareness of the sorry state of our planet and life on this planet was not perhaps that sort of um, on our agenda. So I think for many young designers today, it doesn't necessarily feel like a meaningful thing to sort of go into a business that is sort of continuing to overproduce products that we necessarily don't need in order to make money. So I mean, I think the perception of fashion is also changing. So I think there's sort of there's a change going on that will continue, and we don't know sort of where it will end up. But I think that is also sort of impacting on it. Plus, sort of the presence of this institution, this library, which opened other ways of working in fashion, as well as sort of the more initiatives where the National Museum also has sort of entered the stage more fully as sort of an active player or an active agent, sort of in the Norwegian fashion context.
Did I hear you just say that for emerging fashion designers, it's easier to sustain themselves because of the funding when they turn to artistic practice? Did I just hear you say that? Or am I?
And I if you can add, I think because I have typically I wouldn't sort of claim it.
No. But that's the side of the gist of it.
That's yeah. And just to put a little extra thing in here, and it's also that I think the notion of fashion as a cultural expression is sort of beginning to gain pace here.
Let's bring you into the conversation, Mark.
I want to.
I mean, this is your turf in the sense that, I mean, I think the question would be, with you being a trained fashion designer, but having moved into working with artistic practice, and this is my sort of a hard-edged question, but how do young fashion designers sustain themselves?
Yeah. So I want to continue a little bit where you left it. I will say like there's so many different factors that plays into why people like me maybe like goes into the art sphere. First of all, as a fashion designer in Norway, it's very it reduces you to this level where you feel like you're not really expanding, even with the fashion, quote unquote, fashion category. You're not really like being a part of that system. So for you to be able to expand, the art space gives you some sort of like a little bit more freedom, because in that way you can play a little bit more around your you can experiment a little bit more. You can have more questions that is a little bit more related to the social, to the material part, for me at least. And that's why like I started working a lot with critical theory, because I wasn't able to fully engage with that in the fashion scene, like for instance Oslo Runway or other platforms, because they need you to kind of like produce a digestible product that can be like easily, here you go, beautiful clothing, I was inspired by birds, and then it's very like to be able to transfer to that sort of professionalism when you're just graduated is a hardship. while the art space might give you more time to kind of like reflect a little bit more on your practice. And even though I don't fully call myself like an artist, and I'm like really bound on like I'm a designer first and foremost, yeah, that's the main reason. And of course, there is also another aspect of it, like as a fashion designer, you have to justify why you are a fashion designer in Oslo. So you have to always, say I'm a fashion designer, but it's not enough. So I'm working with dancers, or I'm working with choreographers, or I'm working with this. It's just not enough, because fashion doesn't have that sort of like legitimized cultural value or heaviness with it, at least from my experience. And I think that's the thing. And then yeah, the funding part is like there's no fund, but I'm not really interested in that, because even as an artist, it's not guaranteed. It's like 1,000 people per year that gets like what is it called, stipend. It's not like every artist gets this stipend. You have to apply. 80% of your practice is about applying, so that's also extremely stressful. Like just testing out the artist space for me has also been like quite difficult, because you have to get the fund. At the end of the day, both the fashion and art space is very much, you have to have that economically backing.
But let's talk and investigate a little bit fashion education.
Yes.
And I know there are some members in the public here that are invested in that as well. But I think it's kind of crucial to kind of explore where the educational system sits within this discussion, because the usual, at least if you take it the normal established route, the first step of the journey towards becoming a fashion designer is within an education like the Oslo National Academy of the Arts. You earned your degree there, and you now teach there as well, or have taught there. Yeah. And obviously you can't speak for the institutions. We'll have someone else talking about that later, perhaps, if they want to contribute. But I wonder, as a student there, what sets that school apart from, say, other Nordic schools? I mean, did you feel that there was a specific approach to fashion education when you earned your degree there?
Yeah, because I also went to Oslo Met, so I had like another experience. So KIO has this interdisciplinary approach to fashion, so that already like pushes you, like even like the like you're already sharing the class with other like graphic, illustration, architecture, interior, and then you have the fine arts, the arts and crafts. So you're already like in this bubble with just like creativity field. So you're being like exposed to other people's work constantly. So that pushes you also like to in a good and bad way, because it's not like really isolated like design school. So you're kind of like your curiosity could take you different ways. So that's the very special side with KIO. And also they have a very like open-minded approach, quote unquote. I mean, I did my MA there, so we had a little bit more freedom in terms of like you do your own research and then you just have to justify it somehow. So you kind of have to explore it a little bit. And I mean, there's a focus on the clothing design and less on fashion, would I say, because it's not necessarily that it depends. It depends which class you're in, but it's more like clothing design as traditional, I will say, at least in the BA levels. And then in MA, you can really, expand it as you want. But like on the fashion sense, I feel like there's contradictions. There is a little bit like taboo to kind of like talk about fashion, because it's all about like integrity and artistic, and it's more about like individual development, but not necessarily about like, oh, I want to start a brand and I want to sell product, and the commerciality part of it is not necessarily like maybe super emphasized.
So that kind of harks back to what Astrid was saying about, the lack of an idea of a production or an industry-based kind of conception of fashion, and perhaps more focus on individual artistic development.
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah.
And I also wonder, being a student there, how did you feel that the school and the educational environment was part of the local fashion scene, even Oslo Runway or other initiatives? Does it feel that there's a connect between the educational burgeoning system and something more established?
Okay. I have to take it back a little bit to the past, where when I started to studying like fashion design in the golden era, I was, really looking up to the collective designers like Haik, Anne Karine Torbjørnsen, Armir Batlag, Mikael Olestad. Like, they were a collective force that like were already on the scene and making a lot of buzz. And some of them had also like this collaboration with Kyo somehow, like both teaching and helping and guiding the students. So around those times, around 2015, 16, 17, it was really, really cool vibe when it came to fashion scene, I felt, between what Kyo produces as designers and the students out there, and also these outsiders who are like a part of like quote unquote alternative scene. It was this really cool collaboration. I have to really, say this. It's not to be negative. It's stagnating. I don't feel like Kyo really has that sort of like bridge anymore when it comes to connecting to the out there. And I don't. Yeah, there's not today. I think that's also like, it depends like how deep we want to go. but yeah. So no, I think it's everybody's. It like there is a big lack when it comes to ambition to all individuals, and then you have the lack of the institution. You have the lack of vision. Again, the vision less. I was referring. It's not just the industry. The school also don't have a vision when it comes to what kind of students they wanna produce to wear. Even though they have this open-minded approach and they don't want to reduce students so the students can like there is no where's the standard? That's the question. Like there is, yeah.
Well, I mean, running a label. I mean, I run Alpha, which is an organization that works with empowering emerging talents, and running a label is so incredibly hard, especially in terms, especially financially and in terms of production. The founder and the creative director often ends up performing other tasks than was taught in school, right? And the work, at least I can say in a Danish context and in a UK context, is often created by a team of interns. Now, this is something I've been told by someone that's much smarter and more knowledgeable about Norwegian fashion than I am, but I've been told that it's prohibited to take on unpaid interns in Norway. And while we can all agree that unpaid work is for sure the Achilles heel of the creative industries, the exchange of experience, skills, and network is on the plus side.
Yeah.
And I wonder, I mean, where does this leave emerging Norwegian fashion designers who cannot pay interns and struggle to launch a brand? And this is a question, obviously, I mean, specifically for you, but also for the two of you. How does a young designer set up a brand in Norway and make collections at the same time having to pay interns but can't pay themselves?
Well, that's yeah. Like I understand the intention, and I think the intention is about like not to let young people to be exploited in the industry, because it is a very toxic what is it, culture. But at the same time, because of the niche or the size of the industry in Norway, like we don't even have like cool brands anymore to go and intern for free. It's like the exchange of knowledge is so limited right now, because you have either like different brands who have like resources, they need to be paying the interns, but like as for me, I do everything by myself, so there is no but it depends. I mean, I also feel like there is this is also like kind of like a little bit sad. I feel like everybody's kind of like isolating themselves and kind of like suffering by themselves, because you're not really asking for help either, because we haven't really cultivated again this sort of like collectiveness that comes to how to share the skills, because we have, I mean, you have a lot of designers that you know that you can really help each other when it comes to these sort of like projects, but we haven't really cultivated that culture either. So I think it's like the responsibility lies both on like you, but also like the people you know. How connected are you, and is there like other ways of you can pay to get the help? But I think the lack of like, hey, can you help me to do this collection? But then where are you going to show this collection? You know, it's like the lack of momentum and places and all of these things kind of like combined makes you to this sort of like isolated designer that makes you feel like I have to come to this level so that I can ask for people to at least come and work for me somehow. They are going to be paid in the exchange of other knowledge.
Yes,
But yeah,
happening in Norwegian fashion. But Synne, I mean, are these some of the reasons why we perhaps aren't seeing as many emerging designers coming out of Norway, because of the internal financial structure, or the support schemes that perhaps aren't in place, or the lack of connect between artistic work and industry?
I think, I mean, in one way, I always get this image in my head when we discuss these matters, because after interviewing many of these independent designers a few years ago for the research project that I did, I get this image of this one-man orchestra, like playing the harmonica while sort of mediating things, making things, sort of sending things back and forth, answering emails, trying to be a designer and having not a lot of money. Like sort of practices that aren't sort of sustainable for a person to kind of keep doing over time. So that's sort of one aspect of it. But I mean, I wish I had some sort of brilliant solutions to sort of how to sort of how to move forward. But again, sort of going back to this sort of systems, thinking about the systems. I mean, if you're one person in Oslo and you try to sort of do all the same things as a sort of multi billion brand in Paris, with sort of 200 lawyers that can do things, and there's like unlimited resources and like a giant team, and then you're supposed to be doing sort of, or expected to do the same sort of thing as one person in Oslo. I mean, it doesn't sort of it doesn't make sense. So I think sort of trying to use the I don't know, the creativity that is in the field to find new ways of I don't know, organizing.
yeah,
And not sort of trying to sort of be one person being like a multi-billion brand, because it doesn't it doesn't work.
No, of course not.
But we tend to think that you should be supposed to be sort of practicing as sort of an artistic and creative designer on your own.
And
Recognition, and it doesn't work. But this is all linked to yes, please.
If I may add,
Yes.
we might also turn this around and say that I should argue that because you are in this bubble, the master bubble, you can develop your own talent fairly freely without any interference from the outer world. And you can really dial into your own talents and experiments quite freely with very good teachers very oftenly, and with workshops and whatever. And if it hadn't been for that situation, we couldn't have ended up with all these talented people who can't find work afterwards.
exactly. I mean,
I mean, why should we try to start from there instead of trying to copy what the rest of the world does, or most of the rest of the world does? Maybe we have an asset that very few people have. Can we develop that in any way?
and that's culture. And culture is, of course, what people do. It's the practices and values that we share. And Norwegian fashion is no exception. It It rests as a whole concept of on a whole network of designers, educational system, museums that exhibit fashion, organizations that support and promote fashion, media and press that review and report on fashion. And one thing obviously is the internationalization of Norwegian fashion, but another thing is how its makers and producers are viewed internally in Norway. And I know we've been circling around this this question, but I mean, and this is for all of you, how would you say, sort of on a larger scale, fashion is viewed inside Norway?
Who wanna go?
I go.
Yes.
I guess that. I have also during this research project that I did, there was especially one designer who, or designer slash artist person.
Yeah.
Fill in the blanks. That talked about sort of a very, very like a unique work that was like really labor intensive piece. That was going to be and the designer got a question if it was possible to lend it to sort of somebody who wanted to use it for something, some media production, and it was like treated just as if it was the same way. My English. As sort of a very cheap garment from fast fashion. So it's like sort of, I don't know, the word literacy is like we need to have sort of a garment literacy, clothing literacy, to be able to separate, so that this person pointed out that it's just seen as clothing and a garment has no value sort of in the Norwegian culture, while sort of a sculpture is sort of seen as valuable. So
So Astrid, is fashion viewed as culture in Norway?
It's a kind of there is very little knowledge about it and very little acknowledgement of it, because well, in the design work, to take that firstly, fashion has never got any place until more recently kind of opened up a bit by the Dollar Prize and such, that there's very little understanding of it, of its meaning and significance. It's regarded as fashion, or something that's fading away after half a year, or even just a quarter of the year, and that's it. And something you buy and you get back, but don't actually need. That's it. And we don't have any as regards clothing and dressing. We are quite used to wearing sportswear and do have competition there, but not that much. And then for weddings and such things, but not much else. And you could just remember, I went once to the Opera di Felice in Venezia, and people were dressed up, and they behaved, and they were making and standing in a queue and talking and making conversations of such. When you go to the Norwegian Opera House, people are sitting in shorts and bare legs and jogging shoes, and some when haven't even showered before they go. So please don't go to visit the opera house in the summertime. I'm exaggerating now. Just to get to the picture of it. We have a long way to go as regards traditions and understanding. We need understanding. You can talk about respect and disrespect and all that, but you just need to understand in another way.
And etiquette and behavior, I hear you say.
And if I may add, this understanding, as a very small country, very long up north, we also have a kind of inferiority complex. That means that very often, to get acceptance for something, you have to get acceptance from abroad first, as happens during the Scandinavian design period, for instance. And when you get accept from abroad, it's kind of internalized.
Doors will open.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, there is a Norwegian fashion week, Oslo Runway, that promotes more established labels like Envelope 76, even jewelry labels, and more artistic designers like Fredrik Kjeransen. They organize fashion shows, events, and talks, and they fly in and coordinate international press. And then we have research-heavy institutions like this library and universities and the museum that have a more critical and analytical approach to understanding the subject matter, with an increasing interest in Norwegian and Sami fashion. And it seems that there's, again, this division, and I'm being an outsider, so this is a question for you internal guys. There seems to be this division between the different approaches, and like perhaps going back to what you were saying about how different music genres operate. Yet both, and I would argue this is very important, both Oslo Runway and other industry-driven organizations and these critical institutions operate in culture. I think, I mean, obviously we can debate that, but they are all, involved in cultures of fashion. And so I guess my question is, what initiatives are needed in order to support a richer, both, I mean, now we're speaking about primarily Oslo. I know we have Bergen and other cities as well that have a thriving fashion scene. But what initiatives, other than money, could, make this really happen here in Oslo?
Yeah, I think that from my perspective and from my own situation, it would be very nice to have like actually a serious program that is focused on the transition, like from like, you graduated and how you can go into the professionalism. I think we need those type of programs because like you said, mostly I feel like fashion is seen, okay, not like as this super valuable thing or cultural phenomena, but it's more like as entertainment. It's becoming, there is a hype around it. There is not necessarily substance around it. And as a designer, when you also like attend these Oslo Runway or other, that's the only program we have that is also like that goes out to vaster public. And it's mostly entertainment. And but then when you come here, you have to be super, you need to be super serious about the subject. And I know that can also like scare people a little bit, but I think it's starting to come. I feel like this initiations that has been happening through National Museum and Alpha, I think it's kind of like opening up a little bit. And I know also like a lot of us out there, designers, we're working on something. It's just that it's taking a little bit time. But it would be very, very nice to have like a little bit more dedicated program that somehow combines the designers, the writers, the makers. Like we need to meet up with different levels of knowledges and curiosity. I think there is a big lack of curiosity and ambition. And I think that needs to come from everybody. It has to come from the people who are interested in the subject. It needs to come from the school. It needs to come from the people who have those spatial accessibility to open up a little bit more programs like this one, for instance, like discussions. And that's my 2 cents.
Yeah. Yeah, I think sort of when also sort of the work we have done until now, even though it's just the beginning of this historical project that I'm sort of entering with the National Museum now, but when we look at the sort of different sources, the sort of literary, the sort of the book that it published on subject matters that has to do with fashion in Norway, we see that these are sort of scattered sort of all around all over the place. And it is like different institutions sort of holding different aspects of it. Like some museums are sort of looking at sort of cultural history, while some museums are to do art. Some are doing some things and some are doing some things. And that fashion tends to sort of be a little bit everywhere and nowhere. So I think the first thing we need to do is to sort of open up for a broader discussion about Norwegian fashion, that it doesn't only have to be sort of happening within the sort of industrial system that we see sort of internationally now. And still keep in mind that that doesn't necessarily, that having these different system views sort of open at the same time and being maybe interested in the one or the other doesn't equal that sort of you criticize each other. So there's like room for a lot of different practices, also the commercially oriented, product oriented kinds of practices, and also sort of the alternative practices. So sort of opening more up instead of like closing down or sort of sitting in all these different institutions without sort of having meeting places. So that was a long, yeah.
So there's room for improvement. But I mean, as a Dane coming here, I see this is the land of opportunity. You've got so much going up here, and you actually got, you're a rich, affluent country. It's just, I mean, not just, but it's also a matter of, creating new traditions, creating new meets, new conversations, pairing people together. So, I mean, hopefully this discussion can be a first, stone in the way to paving, along with the lovely initiatives on research initiatives on Norwegian fashion. So this is by no means a conclusion, but just to recap some of the points of tonight's conversation. We need a new working vocabulary in Norwegian fashion. Perhaps we have, established some of them tonight. But, I mean, some of your harsher, perhaps, evaluations on, just to say, Norwegian fashion is niche. It's visionless.
Yeah.
It's slow. It's undiscovered, alternative. And within that lies a promising discovery. Yep. It's boring. There's lots of great talent. There's an interesting rural tradition. And there's a lack of infrastructure. So, Margaret, Synne, and Astrid, thank you so much for sharing your perspectives with me tonight and on Norwegian fashion. And thank you all for coming.